We can speak now to Antony Loewenstein. He's an independent journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory, which is a book on Israel's arms and surveillance industry. He joins us now live from Sydney. Good of you to join us this morning. So I want to start with some of these reports we're getting. The Israeli army saying that it's intercepted rocket fired from Gaza. What do you read into that? I mean, this is the first time it's happened in 7 days. Does that not bode well for the extension deadline? We have about just over half an hour to go before that expires.
It doesn't bode well. I mean, obviously what happens in the coming hours is impossible to say, but I think what it does show very clearly that on both sides, I would argue, including the Israeli side, where there is massive pressure to actually continue the war or restart the war. When I say pressure, I'm talking particularly about parts of Netanyahu's coalition, the more extreme elements who have openly said that if the war stops, that the coalition will collapse. And certainly on the Hamas side, it's obviously a mixed picture, but there is certainly some pressure there to also continue. And I think ultimately this really goes to the heart of most of the women and children that Hamas have are apparently out or about to be out. So therefore we're down to the men. And ultimately what Hamas, of course, has wanted really for years, long before 7th of October, is huge amounts of Palestinian prisoners out of prison, men, women, and frankly, children. And the price is going to increase for that happening on both sides. But I fear that the presence of Antony Blinken in the region at the moment is actually not really going to help, because the US is speaking out both sides of its mouth. On the one hand, it's expressing, mostly through the media, concern of Israel restarting a war in the south, whereas the north has been obliterated. And the south, of course, is where so many Palestinians now are, while at the same time still giving Israel huge amounts of weapons to continue the war. So America's role here, as usual, is hypocritical.
Let's talk a little more about the exchange you say, I mean, the concern is that women and children, there are no more women and children for Hamas to release. So no doubt negotiations becoming a lot trickier. Where do the Israelis stand on the release of Israeli soldiers? How far would they go to get them out from Gaza?
Well, the precedent for this, of course, is Gilad Shalit, who a number of years ago was taken by Hamas. He was an Israeli soldier. He was kept for about 5 years, and Israel released about 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including, in fact, the current Hamas leader, who's in Gaza, as far as we're aware. So the short answer is probably quite a lot. But at the same time, within the Israeli coalition, which is far more right-wing than it was many years ago, there is massive pressure to continue. I mean, the Israeli public on one level is not split. Yes, they want their hostages back, understandably, but there's also huge pressure to eliminate Hamas, assuming that's even possible. And Netanyahu himself is under immense pressure. I note in the last 24 hours there was a blockbuster New York Times story confirming some of the information we've been receiving that I've heard myself from various Israeli sources in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, that Israeli government and military were aware around a year ago of a planned Hamas attack relatively similar to what Hamas eventually did on October 7, but dismissed it as utterly unrealistic. And that really goes to the heart of the profound failure on the Israeli government and military side. And heads are going to have to roll for that. The question, of course, is who and when.
When we look at the possibility of an extension, let's say we go up to 10 days, is there concern within Israel, do you think, that the longer the ceasefire continues, Hamas is getting more of an upper hand, if you like, over the Israeli psyche?
I think in many ways the Israeli psyche, and I spent many years living in East Jerusalem, and I've been visiting there for about 20 years, is that the Israeli psyche, and I really use Gideon Levy, the amazing Israeli journalist, as kind of a touchstone here. The vast majority of Israeli Jews do not generally regard Palestinians as equal to them. Now, I'm not saying all Israeli Jews, of course, I'm saying many. And that's been reflected by Israeli policy for years in Gaza and the West Bank, where the occupation is seen as cost-free. Obviously, October 7 shattered that illusion. But certainly if you read most of the Israeli press, and there are some exceptions, but most of the Israeli press, the message is pretty similar. Kill Hamas leaders, destroy Hamas, remove them from any controlling or governmental influence in Gaza, which of course is easier said than done. And that pressure on the government is massive. And of course, at the same time, Whereas much of the world's looking at Gaza, rightly, the West Bank is exploding. There's been hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians killed and arrested, I might add. Thousands, in fact, have been arrested in the last 6 or so weeks. So it's combustible. And what is so disturbing is there was a really amazing report in 972, which is an Israeli media outlet in the last 24 hours, showing how Israel is increasingly using artificial intelligence in its target gathering in Gaza, the impact of which is that Israel will kill huge amounts of Palestinian civilians under the guise of apparently trying to get one low-level Hamas leader. And we've seen the reality of that, where there's now 15 to maybe 20,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, the vast majority of whom are civilians. So on the Israeli side, all that can stop this war, frankly, restarting is Washington. That's the sad reality.
OK, we'll leave it there for now. Antony Loewenstein, independent journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory, a book on Israel's arms and surveillance industry. Thank you.
Thank you.